Hey, almost caught me napping there. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the lair. I'm still Largo, I think. And this is the lair, chaos that it is. We are going to delve into something fun today, the Hammer horror films. And to help me to explore some of these cool pieces of yesteryear, I've asked our old friend Gojitron to join us. There he is. Hey, Goji.
Hi, I heard it was hammer
Momir.
time.
Nice.
It was
Hammer
hammer
time,
time. Hammer
indeed.
time, right? Oh wait, wrong hammer. Sorry. It's
It'll work. It's all good.
unappropriate. Anyway, hi. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being available. Always fun to hang out with you and talk movies, toys, what have you.
Mm-hmm. It's all good.
Man, this was quite the rabbit hole. I thought Universal Pictures was tough, but going into the history of Hammer horror was a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Just because there's so much good stuff to go through, and it ties in not just to cinema, but other parts of the horror genres, whether it be merchandising or comic books, what have you. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Yes, sir.
So once again, welcome my special guest, Gojitron.
That's me.
That's him. So let's delve into Hammer. It's a British film company, most of you know, based in London, founded in 1934. Company's best known for a series of gothic, horror, and fantasy films made from the mid 1950s until the 1970s. Many of these involve classic horror monsters such as Baron von Frankenstein, Count Dracula, and the Mummy. And Hammer reintroduced audiences to these by filming them in vivid color for the first time. And that was really the thing that
Mm-hmm.
sold them over some of the Universal pictures that came before.
Yep.
Their Technicolor updates of classic Universal Studios monster movies made global horror icons out of two of my favorite actors, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and ignited a worldwide revival of B grade Gothic horror.
Mm-hmm.
Over a 44-year period, Hammer produced nearly 166 films, in addition to three anthology series for television, including Journey into the Unknown and Hammer House of Horror.
Yep.
Journey to the
Hammers.
Unknown is kind of like that was like their version of Twilight Zone, more or less. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
Twilight Zone. I think Night Gallery was one. One of
Yeah.
those. Yeah, one of those sort of horror anthology series. Yeah, and Hammer's one of those studios where you just say the name of the studio and you know what you're getting. There's very few studios where you can say that, like Disney. You kind of know what
Yes.
you're getting, or Lucasfilm and Hammers in that category too, where you just say the name of the studio and you kind of know what you're in for.
Well, it used to be true. I don't know. Sometimes some of these studios today are kind of it's hit or miss. But
Yeah.
back in the day, yeah, that
Hmm.
was absolutely true.
Hmm.
And of course, these were the two biggest hits for these guys: Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula. And we'll definitely get into those.
Hmm.
A lot of times seen as a double feature at the drive-in or what have you, and just fun stuff.
Yep.
They Hammer brought something new to cinema screens: splashes of bright red Technicolor blood, and a
Hmm.
more overtly sexual Count Dracula in the persona of Christopher Lee. A lot of people who only know him from some of his modern films, whether it be the Star Wars prequels or his time in Lord of the Rings, it's like
Hmm.
he was a very handsome man in his youth, and
Yep.
he played a very uh, sensual Dracula, and
Yep.
the chicks were digging it.
He brought the sex appeal.
You know, he did. A lot of this would seem tame by today's standards, but at the time these came out, they drew a bit of outrage from the
Yes.
critics.
It was a different
Speaking of the
time.
critics, oh yes, one of Hammer's biggest battles was not at the box office, but was with the BBFC, which at the time was called the British Board of Film Censors. They detested horror movies and hoped by stamping all of them with an adults only X rating, they could just keep them from polluting young minds. And Hammer really had to fight to get that rating changed so that they could
Mhm.
get these things into cinemas.
Of course, that always works against the cause, because as soon as you tell people you shouldn't see this, people want to see it.
That's right. It's like putting up a wet paint sign.
Very counterproductive.
So they did several films prior to Curse of Frankenstein. Most of them were black and white. They were okay, but this is the one that really shot them into the stratosphere as far as popularity. The Curse
Hmm.
of Frankenstein in 1957. It was the first color horror film that Hammer did, and it started a long and illustrious career for Peter Cushing and Hazel Court, who was one of the early scream queens that gained some notoriety for this kind of genre of filmmaking.
Hmm.
And
And at this point in the studio's history, they were having to tap dance around Universal, because Universal had threatened litigation if their version of Frankenstein at all mirrored the original Boris Karloff version. But that kind of changed down the line, and we can talk about that a little later. But yeah, they had to bring their own design, their own flavor to this, so it wouldn't be any similarities between that one and the Universal.
right, I mean, the biggest thing they were concerned with was the makeup design for the monster.
Right. No
And
flatheads.
right, no bolts sticking out. I mean,
Hmm.
they were very specific about how they didn't want this to be just a copy of the Universal uh, monster makeup that Boris Karloff had made famous.
Hmm.
And at first there was some, like you say, there was some controversy, but eventually they worked it out.
Hmm.
But this is a film that definitely established the idea of Hammer horror as a distinctive brand of Gothic cinema.
Hmm.
And as you can see, they did a very different design for the creature makeup appliances, more horrific. You know,
Yeah,
for
more
one,
more
being in color.
more grotesque, I think, than the Karloff
Yeah.
version.
And was this the first film that Cushing and Lee appeared in together? I don't remember. It was
I'm not
certainly one of the
sure.
more famous ones.
Right, right. I'm not sure if they appeared before this, but it's certainly one of the first.
Right. And a young Peter Cushing as the Baron von
Hmm.
Frankenstein did a
Hmm.
great job and lent that aristocratic air to the Doctor. And Christopher Lee did a great job as the creature. He gave it a very emotional performance with very limited ways to emote. I mean,
Right,
this was not a
hmm
eloquent creature like in
and
some versions.
Peter Cushing established his Doctor Frankenstein as a real bastard in this film, and we can talk about that as we go forward. But yeah, a very very different take on the Doctor than Colin Clive had in the original Frankenstein.
And a bit of a womanizer too. I found that kind
Yeah,
of curious.
yeah, he was a very unsavory character.
Indeed.
Brilliant, but
Which makes you
unsavory.
right, which makes you kind of root for the monster a little more.
Yeah.
So there were 6 sequels to Curse of Frankenstein. Um, just like with any good monster film, there's always going to be, let's crank out some more and see what kind of box office take we can get.
Hmm.
Your mileage will vary on these. Some were actually critically considered decent. Revenge
Hmm.
of Frankenstein was considered pretty good. By the time you get to things like Frankenstein Created Woman, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, the wheels had kind of come off the bus. It was getting kind of
Yeah,
goofy.
definitely the law of diminishing returns was in effect.
Yeah,
And it's interesting that the through character in all these films is Dr. Frankenstein. There's a different creature in every single one of these films. So it wasn't like
right.
the original Universal pictures where you had the same monster throughout. This one, you got different monsters every time. And Peter Cushing was the thing that tied them all together. All except one. He didn't appear in the horror of Frankenstein, I don't think. That was a different actor. But he did return for the last one, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And in that movie, it was David Prowse that played the creature. So I
That's
believe that
right.
was the first time that Cushing and David Prowse worked together before Star Wars.
Yep. David Prowse, of course, filled the big black boots of Darth Vader in
Hmm.
the film. And yeah, interesting how all these people come together.
Hmm.
So there is kind of slim pickings when it comes to Hammer horror action figures. There's a lot of memorabilia out there, but it's like there's two tiers. There's the crazy expensive tier, and then there's the guys like us can afford tier. And Mego
Right.
seems to be hitting it right where we live.
Hmm.
Good figures, good sculpts on the face, and they did a great series. Some of these are still available. Some of them, I think, were exclusives from just a few years ago,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. After all
they
these
can all
years,
still be had.
yeah. After all these years, Modern Mego is the only toy company that's done any sort of a comprehensive Hammer horror line. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, there are certainly other toy makers in the past who could have done it. Maybe it's trouble getting the licenses or what have you. But because I know with the Hammer films were licensed through all sorts of different distributors outside the UK, so that may kind of muck up the works a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely made it difficult to try to track down what was available and just how to locate it outside of the UK.
Hmm.
So, but again, the Frankenstein that they did is a great figure,
Hmm.
and then we move right along because of the success of Frankenstein. Hammer's like, well, let's do Dracula,
Hmm.
and they had to work with Universal, even though, from what I understand, these were considered to be in public domain because the original story
Right.
was not owned by Universal. They didn't have a right to that, but
Right.
since they had made a very popular film with Bela Lugosi and the
Hmm.
sequels, there was some finagling that had to go on between the two movie houses, but they
Yeah.
worked it out.
Hmm.
And like we've talked about, Lee just brought a whole different uh, characterization to Dracula than what Bela Lugosi did.
Hmm.
And both performances are obviously great and compelling, but he definitely brought a new audience to the horror genre with
Yeah.
his performance.
And I had read that Lee had trouble getting work before this because casting people told him that he was too tall and he was too foreign looking, whatever that meant. But this pretty much turned his career around. Something that
Absolutely, and
he didn't embrace his Hammer characters as much as Peter Cushing did. Peter Cushing really went all in on the characters, and Lee kind of tried to distance himself from them over time.
yeah. Well, I can imagine he was worried about being typecast and not being
Hmm.
able to be taken seriously as
Yeah,
an actor
exactly.
in other. I believe he did some theater work as well.
Hmm.
And of course, these guys became very good friends. You do over 20 films together. Either you love each other or you can't stand each other.
Right.
They were good friends all through their lives and enjoyed working together.
Hmm.
Maybe they didn't always enjoy the scripts they were working on, but they enjoyed each other's company.
Yeah.
So, and this was, these are some iconic images that when you think Hammer horror, this is what comes to mind.
Yep.
And in this case, we're seeing, you know, Peter Cushing playing.
Van
The name
Helsing.
just went right out of my head. Van Helsing.
Van
Thank you.
Helsing. Yeah. And I think the scene with the candlesticks and making the crucifix of the candlesticks was something they came up with while filming. It wasn't in the script. That just
Right.
happened, by happenstance while they were filming, and it became an
And
iconic scene.
exactly. It's so much so that even with some of the action figures, they made sure they had the two candlesticks to make the
Right.
scene. And of course, as with Frankenstein, there are a ton of sequels.
Hmm.
We won't go through all of these because some of them are truly wretched, but they are fun nonetheless.
Yeah.
If you're looking for something to do on a Saturday, any of these are good fun popcorn, goofiness.
Yeah. And a couple
And
of these Christopher Lee appeared in, but he didn't have any speaking lines. He just kind of appeared as Dracula and didn't say anything. He was kind of pressured by the studio into reprising the role. They told him, "Yeah, Christopher, if you don't come back as Dracula, you're going to put a lot of people out of work in the production crew." So, out of loyalty to the crew, he came back and did a few more films. So,
wow,
credit to
what a
him.
guy!
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from all reports, Christopher Lee was a wonderful person to work with and
Yep.
very professional.
Hmm.
So very cool. And of course, back to Mego, and
There
there's
they
those
are.
candlesticks.
Hmm.
Again, they
I
did a
do have
great
those
job
two
on these.
versions. I do
Nice.
have those two versions. I got the original Van Helsing, who came with the he came with a small crucifix and a small wooden stake, but the I didn't get the candlestick version. That was a later release.
Right. And again, the head sculpts are really good. You
Yep.
definitely get the likeness there,
Hmm.
and the soft goods that they did on these really capture the essence of the character. I think.
Yep. That's something Mego does well is the soft goods costumes. Of course, they've been doing that style of figure since the 1970s, so
Yeah,
they've got a good
they've
handle
definitely
on it
been
now.
working it down.
Hmm.
Yeah, and one of the sequels that's of note. Well, actually, this isn't a sequel. This is the same film, just marketed a little differently,
Hmm.
and it's a little confusing sometimes. But Dracula and Horror of Dracula are the same film, but they're
Right.
just two different cuts. So the film was cut for its original cinema release by the BBFC, who we've talked about before. And in 1958, they made them remove some of the more bloody shots and Lucy's staking and the final disintegration of Dracula. They thought it was too graphic.
Right.
Later on, once DVD became popular, this was re released as Horror of Dracula, and some of those scenes, the ones that survived, because some of the original film negatives apparently weren't available, uh, much of it was put back in.
Hmm.
And then in 2007, a restored print was put out that has much of the scenes that you couldn't see before. And
Hmm.
of course, the great tagline here, and that was kind of another running theme with Hammer was, don't you dare see it alone. You'll be too
Right.
frightened.
That disintegration scene, his death scene, was pretty horrific for the time. So I could see
Oh
why the
yeah,
censors would have a problem with it. It was pretty gruesome. I mean, by today's standards, it's not, but back in the late 1950s, yeah, it was pretty bad.
definitely. And on the other end of the spectrum for collectibles, these are pretty spendy.
Hmm.
Sideshow collectibles tend to be, higher end collectibles. They're 12-inch scale. What is that? 1/6 scale.
1/6, yep.
Beautiful, yeah, beautiful sculpts. Again, the head sculpts, the likenesses, the cloth goods. If you're looking for something premium and you're a hardcore Hammer horror fan, this is a good way to go.
Hmm.
Um, and there's another company that's just recently put out some new figures. I'm not familiar with this company. Caustic Plastic and Infinite Statue apparently are two companies that came together to make these versions of
Hmm.
Horror of Dracula figures. Again, 1/6 scale, great likenesses, lots of accessories, and even a little pedestal. And you can even get the coffin as a accessory if you wish. So
Yep.
these
Too
are
rich, too rich
available
for
for
my blood.
pre-order now. Yeah, same here. And of course, you can't have Dracula without Van Helsing, so they've
I
done
like
that as
this one with
well.
the removable overcoat, and you can see the suit underneath. That's nice.
Yeah, it's really nicely done. And of
Hmm.
course, the hammer and stake, nice
Right.
touch. No candlesticks though, so points off for that.
Yeah.
But with the success of the other two uh, franchises, they decided to dip into the Mummy. Again, a very different take from what Universal did.
Hmm.
Um, and just an interesting note, this was often double billed, at least in the US, with Vincent Price's The Bat.
Hmm.
And, another fun film from that time period. So
Yep.
late 50s, early 60s, this was great drive in fare, uh, very popular stuff.
And I think it's at this point
And
where Hammer made that deal with Universal where they could officially do remakes of the Universal films. They did put an actual deal in place so they didn't have to continue to tiptoe around Universal's versions. They could just make whatever they wanted, which
yeah,
was
and
smart on
that
Universal's
definitely,
part because Universal was out of the horror business by this time. So it was a good deal
right.
for them to just hand over the rights to Hammer and let them do it.
Yeah, and when DVD and other formats came along, it did nothing but help people. Once they see these, they want to go back and see the Universals.
Hmm.
Once those were made available, helped everybody.
Hmm.
Now, do you know for sure which version of the Mummy this was? Because there've been a few different mummies. I'm not sure which.
I think Hammer based their Mummy on the Universal sequels, so that would have been the
Okay,
Karras version.
okay,
I think.
and the
I might be wrong.
yeah, it's hard to keep track of sometimes. But
Hmm.
again, very different makeup, very different design. Um, but if you squint, you can see Christopher Lee in there,
Yeah.
and being tall and menacing, he definitely made a very scary mummy.
Hmm.
And Migo has captured that very well, at least in the face sculpt.
Yeah.
And
A much dirtier looking Mummy than the Universal version. He looks like the Hammer version looks like it's encrusted in mud all the time, or
yeah,
or,
he's
or
definitely
decomposing.
yeah, he wasn't as well kept
Yeah.
as the Karloff version. But cruising right along, we go from mummies to werewolves.
Hmm.
Now, to my knowledge, this was the only werewolf movie that Hammer ever made.
Yep.
Apparently, it wasn't as successful, so they
Hmm.
decided to just stick to the vampires and the Frankensteins.
Hmm.
Um, it was the
This is
first.
actually the first Hammer film I ever saw on
Oh, really?
back in the mid '70s on Creature double feature on Saturday
Hmm.
afternoon. This was my first exposure to Hammer. Had a very shall we say salacious origin for the werewolf in this one. Very
Indeed.
unsavory. If
Yeah, it
if
was
you know the plot of it.
right. It was a very different story from what Universal did. I
Hmm.
mean, this one, he's a very tragic character, much like what we had with oh, what was the name of the gentleman? Talbot.
Right.
This isn't the Talbot version of the werewolf. It's
Hmm.
it's it's a very different story. Like you said, there's some tawdry things that go on in the background, and how he becomes cursed and
Hmm.
gains the problems that he has. But it was shot in color, which was kind of novel for its time. 61. There were still a lot of black and white films when it came to this kind of affair of genres of horror stuff.
Hmm.
But this was, I think, yeah, it was Oliver Reed's first starring role, and he is one of those actors that you'll see in a lot of different films.
Hmm.
Probably his most memorable of recent days was in Gladiator, where he played the was it Marcus Aurelius's mentor in the gladiatorial pits. I can't remember the name of the character, but
Yeah.
very great character actor,
Hmm.
and he went on to do a lot of fun stuff.
Hmm.
But I like this movie. I don't know why it wasn't successful at the time. Just
Yeah. I liked
just
it too.
didn't yeah,
And
didn't hit as well as some of the others.
no official toys of the Curse of the Werewolf have ever been made. I'm not sure why. Could be
Yeah,
an
I
actor
looked.
likeness thing. Maybe Oliver Reed's estate doesn't want to, authorize figures. I don't know, but no official
There,
figures to
I
be
believe
had.
there's right. There is like a mask available of the werewolf, and
Hmm.
there's like a bust, but no action figures, which is
Yeah.
a bummer. I think Migo could have done this one justice.
Hmm.
Speaking of other media, um, this film was adapted into a 15-page comic strip in 1978 for a magazine known as The House of Hammer, and it was very popular in the UK, and well known for taking Hammer scripts and adapting them into a comic format.
Hmm.
And done in black and white, which actually lended to the horror aspect.
Hmm.
So these are some fun reads. I
Yep.
definitely recommend them. Great artists, and of course, good stories because they're taken right from the Hammer scripts.
Hmm. Yeah. All the
So
black and white horror magazines in the '70s were great. Vampirella, eerie, creepy. They all had some
yeah,
great artwork in them.
very popular.
Yep.
That and the Kung Fu movie magazine and
Hmm.
comic book styles, but that's a rabbit hole for another day.
Yeah.
Now, this was a kind of a curious one. They decided to get away from just mimicking what Universal had covered and took on a whole different type of monster. But again, they brought in Cushing and Lee because you know they're good. They work well together, and why not?
Hmm.
Very gothic style. That was kind of a signature with Hammer. Is up until I think late '60s, early '70s, they definitely tried to do period pieces with their horror. It was very
Right.
much that gothic mansions and the dress and the styling.
Hmm.
Um, the lady that they brought in, Prudence Hyman, was a ballerina, so she had a very graceful, floating, wraith-like performance that she gave that really lended itself to this creepiness of the character.
Hmm. Definitely.
What did you think of this film?
This is one of my favorite Hammer films, actually, just because it is different. It's not a different take on something that's done before. This is an original sort of Hammer concept, and you don't see Medusa often. I think it was this film, and then later on in Clash of the Titans. So yeah, I really like Greek mythology. I'm into that. That's
Yeah.
another rabbit hole we can go down someday. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
whenever I see like Greek mythological monsters in films, I enjoy them. So.
Yeah, and again, this was well done, and it just kind of more of an original concept
Hmm.
compared to some other horror genre we've seen. And again, this one was also adapted for the House of Horror magazine, and
Hmm.
very well, I might add. I really liked reading this. It's cool.
Yep.
So uh, this is one of the few that Migo actually did beyond the Frankenstein and Dracula
Hmm.
figures. Um, did they get the likeness of the actress? I mean,
Well,
it's not bad.
interesting note about this figure. Uh, in a way, it was never made. They solicited this figure through the deal they had with Topps, the trading card company. So it was supposed to be an exclusive Topps figure. Then it got canceled. And I read rumors that it had something to do with the actress's likeness rights, where they had to cancel this particular
Ah,
figure. But then they did repurpose it into the figure I have, which is the generic Medusa.
okay.
So the
I
actual
s-
Hammer Gorgon never came out, but the generic Medusa did. It's just pretty much the same figure with a different face sculpt. So I'm
okay.
not
That's
sure what
interesting.
happened exactly with this Gorgon figure, but yeah, it was solicited, people paid for it, and then it was canceled and refunded. So
Bummer,
it's
because I
it's a
remember
mystery,
yeah, I did see the Medusa figure offered, and I didn't know why. Because there's no film called Medusa. There wasn't a
right?
Medusa
Yeah, it
figure
was just
anywhere
a
else.
repurposing of this figure. The tooling was already done, so.
That makes more sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, curious how some of these licenses work sometimes.
Yeah.
But moving through some of the other goodies, we have some zombies, and
Hmm.
I don't think zombies were really done before Hammer took this on. I mean, not
Yeah,
really.
this was one of the first. This came out 2 years before Night of the Living Dead, which kind
Right.
of launched the whole zombie genre. And this one very underrated. I don't think the Plague of Zombies gets the credit it deserves for kind of you know being the first uh, piece in the foundation of that whole genre.
Right, and it was very creepy. The makeup effects were pretty good for the time, and
Hmm.
the story was not bad. This one deals more with Haitian voodoo and black magic to bring people back to life, but I thought it was well done.
Hmm.
And of course, a lot of how the makeup was done here inspired the later zombie films that started popping up.
Hmm.
And I believe this was also in the Hammer comic books. Yes, Hammer Horror number 13. And great artwork there.
Yep.
This was actually a painted cover by Brian Lewis, who is uh, a really good artist from the UK.
Hmm.
And of course, good old Migo gave us
Hmm.
a good zombie.
Yep.
And do you have this one?
I do not know. Yeah, I'm not huge
I
into zombie films. I
yeah,
think I watched The Walking Dead for a few seasons until it got repetitive, but I'm not a huge zombie fan. I appreciate the genre, but I'm not that much into it.
Right, and it's hit or miss with me.
Hmm.
I like to I like curious takes on it, like what was the film Serpent in the Rainbow, which kind of dealt with
Yeah.
some of those aspects. That was terrifying when I
Hmm.
first saw that, but more psychological than just the oogie boogie zombie
Right.
guy.
Hmm.
But this one was kind of odd. It was
Yeah.
popular. A young girl is changed into a reptile after being
Hmm.
abducted and cursed by a Malay snake cult. Weird story. Don't know where it came from. Like you said, it doesn't really delve into mythology. It's not an established
Yep.
horror trope. It was just kind of its own thing. Lizard people. Who
Yeah.
knew? You know?
And really creepy makeup.
Oh yeah.
The makeup and prosthetics are
And
very disturbing on this one.
again, set in a gothic setting with a
Mhm.
very unique character. I, it was interesting, and apparently this was filmed back to back with Plague of Zombies, so a lot of the sets are the same.
Mhm.
They're saving on the budget there.
And
Uh,
people getting
Another
cursed
great
seems to
comic
be
book
the
adaptation.
yeah, people getting cursed seems to be the default origin for a lot of these hammer creatures. People getting cursed right and left.
That's it. Got to watch out who you piss off. You don't want to piss off gypsy ladies that can curse you or what have you. So uh, this is another one of the few
Hmm.
that got the Miko treatment. There were two different versions with some slight color variations, both with that creepy reptile face
Hmm.
and pretty good representations.
Yep.
So I like that you know, I always preferred the coffin box rather than the carded.
Yes.
When I think about classic Mego, especially the ones I got as a kid, they always came in the box. They didn't come on a card.
Yep. That's how I prefer them as well.
And then we move into kind of a different take on a classic character. There were several Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde films done by many different companies over the years.
Hmm.
This was kind of a unique take in the fact that with this one, the Dr. Jekyll is actually kind of an older, decrepit man. When he becomes Mr. Hyde, instead of becoming a monster, he becomes a very attractive, suave, debonair kind of guy. So it's kind of
Hmm.
very similar to what Jerry Lewis did with the Nutty Professor kind of idea,
Yep.
kind of that take on it.
Hmm.
So with this, taking the formula was his way to kind of regain his youth and his, you know, yesteryear, for lack
Hmm.
of a better term.
Yep.
Not a bad film. Different take on the story. I
Hmm.
thought it was pretty good. And then we get into some of the more bizarre ones. In '71, they did one called Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde,
Hmm.
where we have some gender swapping going on. Back in the day, '71 was very progressive, apparently.
Hmm.
So when Jekyll takes his formula, he derives his formula from I think it was like a female growth hormone or something like that. It turned him into a woman, and quite a shapely one at that.
Yep.
So very
Yeah.
interesting. This one also took some actual real world baddies in the form of Jack the Ripper and the Burke and Hare monster case or murder cases from back in the day, and put that into the plot as well. So they kind
Yeah.
of sprinkled some truth with their fiction.
This was sort of into Hammer's exploitation period, where they were trying to put
Yes,
little more nudity into the films to compete with the exploitation genre. So, but the
yes,
subject matter became a little more salacious.
it was art,
Yeah.
quote unquote. Yes, and yeah, definitely late '60s, early '70s. They were trying to experiment with anything that would get people into the theater,
Hmm.
and this is what you get.
Hmm.
Speaking of what the
Yeah.
1974, one of the final vampire stories that Hammer did is actually one of my favorites because it's so good it's bad. It's one of those horrible films that I just love watching for the. It is how do you call it? It's accidentally funny, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Hmm.
You've got a great mashup of gothic horror vampire with 70s kung fu, complete with sound effects and all that good stuff. And it's a fun watch. I challenge anybody to watch this and not have a good time.
And Peter Cushing
So
came back for this one too. So
he did.
good for him for his
Um,
dedication.
yeah, Christopher Lee stayed well clear of this, and I
Yeah.
can't blame him. But it was fun. It's a fun romp.
Hmm.
Uh, so much so that it got a rebranding as the Seven Brothers Meet Dracula when it came to the States. It was the same film. They just kind of gussied it up a bit.
Right.
And, they played around with how they were going to cut the film. At one time, it's like, well, we're going to take Dracula out and just focus on the brothers. And then they realized, no, people want to see Dracula. Let's put him back in. And it's a wild ride. No action figures for the kung fu guys, but I'm sure you guys can make some customs if you really
Oh
enjoy
yeah.
it. And again, Hammer comic books, they did a great rendition of this. Probably, in my opinion, the graphic novel version of it is better than the film.
Hmm.
The story, it definitely flows better the way that they adapted it here. So, speaking of exploitation,
Yes.
as we slide into the 70s, this was a big thing with Hammer to definitely try to keep their doors open and keep the coffers full. They were more and more apt to hire buxom young ladies, whether they could act or not, to be the damsels or even the femme fatales. Some of these were, the baddies themselves, and quite lovely. So we'll delve into that here. Let me pull up the next slide set and we'll see what's going on. Here we go. Back to the very first of their most popular films. When you look at the lobby art or the posters for foreign markets, I think this was a Belgian one. They definitely put more of the how do you say decollage or they definitely
Decolletage.
put that's the word
Hmm.
the ample assets of the females in the film. They definitely put that on
Yeah.
the art to draw them in. They couldn't do this in the American market. They would have been
Or,
frowned
or,
upon.
or
But
we could just say boobs. I don't know if there's any
yeah, we can
kids
say
watching.
boobs. It shouldn't be. So with the release of Curse of Frankenstein in '57, it definitely met with some problems with the critics, as we've talked about before, mostly because of the Technicolor graphic, a lot of blood and a lot of violence,
Hmm.
but also the uh, attractive women. We'll just put
Right.
it that way.
The
Uh,
sexuality.
Yes, the Tribune called it a peep show of freaks, and the Times recommended it for sadists only, which of course just sold more tickets because people read the reviews and said,
Right.
"Yeah, I got to check this out."
It's a must see now.
Very, oh yeah, very tame by our standards today, but back then it was quite titillating.
Hmm.
Hazel Court, a beautiful lady, and she's been in a lot of films, both American and British. Most popular in Hammer films for Curse of Frankenstein and The Man Who Could Cheat Death. And then, of course, she's also been in a lot of American horror films as well.
Hmm.
And someone whose career is definitely worth checking out. Neat lady. And then, of course, we can't let Frankenstein, you know, off the hook. This was one of the more goofy, in my opinion, versions of the Bride of Frankenstein storyline. But we have a Playboy playmate from 1966. We have Miss August, who became the creature in Frankenstein Created Woman. Uh, her physical attributes were mostly what was kept because they had to dub her because her accent was a little thick.
Hmm.
Her English was not so good, but very beautiful lady, and
Hmm.
she did a great job with what she had to work with. And Peter Cushing didn't seem to be bothered too much by it.
Now he didn't mind.
He was getting a paycheck, man. He was happy.
Yep.
She also appeared in Star Trek in Mud's Women, which
Hmm.
I didn't recognize her, but then I went back and was like, oh yeah, Small World.
Hmm.
And then of course you could just see it in his face. This poor guy, he was not having it. Um, but again, like we've talked about with what George A. Romero did with Night of the Living Dead in '68, really brought a whole different level of violence and gore to horror films. And Hammer didn't feel like they could really compete with that. It's like we can't go any gorier because of our British critics that we have to appeal to. But where we can't play up the gore anymore, maybe we can play up the sexuality and sell things that way. So they started bringing in a bevy of babes into the
Hmm.
films.
Yep.
And Mr. Lee was not very happy about this at all. He's a professional actor, and damn it, he's doing a horror movie, not a Juggies review.
Yep.
But I love the look on his face there. He's just, I mean, I don't think that was acting. I think that was really
Can
him saying,
someone
"Why
please
am I
bring me a
here?"
better script?
Poor guy. I mean, yeah, and he did again great job as Dracula, but he was definitely overshadowed by the
Hmm.
vampire women
Yeah.
of the film.
I have to say, one of my favorite Hammer girls is Carolyn Monroe. She appeared
Oh
in a couple
yes,
of different films. She was in one of the Sinbad movies. I think she was a Bond girl as well. Yes. Very attractive back in the
and
day.
was she in the Frankenstein film too?
I'm not sure. She was in a couple of Dracula films.
Yeah,
Not sure if
I
if
know
she
her
was in a
name came
Frankenstein
up.
film.
I don't know if I included
It's
her in the
possible.
slides I have today, but
Hmm.
yeah, very very lovely lady. I
Hmm.
don't think I did, but when we'll come back around and hit that rabbit hole too.
Hmm.
Not today, but another day. Um, this was kind of the coffin nail or coffin stake for Lee's version of Dracula.
Hmm.
Dracula AD 72 and the Satanic Rites of Dracula from 1973. Very different from the classic versions he had done before. Most of the horror film uh, from Hammer before had been in Gothic settings. These were put into modern day. It's swinging London, baby,
Yeah.
and he was not liking it at all. They definitely played up, the groovy music and the scantily dressed chicks and the fast cars and all that. And he was
Hmm.
like, "This is nothing to do with Dracula. I don't want to do this anymore." Did
Austin
these two
Powers meets
films, and then
Dracula.
yeah, exactly. Uh, if you loved Austin Powers, you will love Dracula AD 72.
Mhm.
Um, it is what it is. There's
Yep.
nothing more to say about that.
Yep. Hammer was trying to
Uh,
throw everything against the wall and see what stuck at that point.
oh yeah, this was towards the downward spiral of
Hmm.
the movie house, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So when they couldn't get Christopher Lee to come back and put on the cape again, they decided to go a different direction and tied into something that was a trope of the time, the lesbian vampire. And there was a whole bunch of these. The three that were probably the least horrific were what was known as the Karnstein trilogy, um, based on I think that was the director. There was a decent story, the novella Carmilla, which even Universal kind of did with their Dracula's daughter. They kind of borrowed from that storyline. And there's elements of that in Vampire Lovers, but then it just kind of wanders off into just flat exploitation films
Hmm.
with, fangs and boobs.
Yep.
So if you like fangs and boobs, you'll like these three movies. Otherwise,
Exactly.
steer clear. They were not great.
Fangs, boobs, and lesbians.
Yep, it was a thing. But coming back around to something with a little bit better taste to it, the House of Horror we've touched on before, Black and White magazine, great articles, and the comics that were many of them adaptations of the films that have been done, along with a couple of other backup stories, including Van Helsing's Terror Tales. Really love these. They're still available. They're out there. You guys may have seen them at different swap meets or comic shops. Um, Worth a look, definitely, if you're into this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
As you can see, here's a great example of some of the interior pages. Really well done. There's just something about that black and white, heavy ink, and the shadowing. It works,
Yep,
which is
definitely.
ironic because Hammer was known for their color films, but the black and white comics really
Hmm.
really did good storytelling.
Hmm.
And they are available in a collected edition that just came out a few years ago in 2019. Really nice hardback that's got the best of all these Hammer stories, which I highly recommend.
Hmm.
They also dipped into television, and this is available on DVD now. It's not bad. It was an ITV show. ITV is one of the few channels, and you had BBC, you had ITV, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there's some
Yep.
others that came along later, but they did only sadly 13 episodes before they got canned. But good stories, and each one it was a monster of the week, and each one had a different kind of monster. So you had witches one week, werewolves, ghosts, voodoo. Um, but unlike some of their earlier stuff, they even went into the less monstrous, well, still monstrous, but not creature. They did, a couple of serial killer and cannibalism stories, but well acted. They had a lot of good, British TV stars that came and went in the show. If you can find it, it's definitely worth picking up.
Hmm.
And then we talk about our top two picks, and of course, for you, the Gorgon, probably one of your favorite Hammer films.
Yep.
And this is an interesting figure. It,
Yeah.
it I've never seen any werewolf figure for the Hammer werewolf, but this one's
Hmm.
darn close.
So this is a knockoff figure. Back in 2006, these creepy classics figures were sold at the Dollar Tree stores, and these are made
Nice.
by Greenbrier International, the same company that makes the Final Faction toy line.
Oh, okay.
They had a Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, Godzilla, and King Kong, all unlicensed, and they had this one, which was based on the Curse of the Werewolf. Where did he go? He's right here. So it came on a card
That
back, and these are just
that's a
small.
great figure. Let me
Yeah,
let me
these.
blow you up big so we can see
Yeah,
that. Let's see. My system is not cooperating. There you are.
there I am. So these are
Yeah,
just small, like 2 inch tall PVC figures, but it is the only figure of that Curse of the Werewolf that you can find. And they came on card backs, and on the back of the card is a little like a cutout you can use as like a trading card with the poster art on it. So it definitely
that's
was
really
based on the Hammer film, but
sure.
without a license because it's a dollar store figure. I don't think anyone from the
What?
UK is going to be checking dollar stores for unlicensed figures. So,
Right. Yeah, and as you said, that's the only example in figure form for that
hmm,
that character.
yep,
Very cool.
yeah,
For me, you know, again, I love all the classics, but I had a lot of fun with the Seven Brothers Meet Dracula. It's a goofy kung fu horror mishmash. It's just a fun watch, and of course the collected edition of all of the great comic book stories in
hmm,
Hammer. Those would probably be my favorite things that have come out of the Hammer House of Horror.
yep,
So
good picks.
that yeah, that's what we've got for today. There is much more, folks. Looking at Hammer Cinema, I mean, we've just touched on their horror genre, which they're most known for. They
Hmm.
also did a lot of sci-fi films. They did, dinosaur and caveman stuff. They did some detective stories. All are good. And
Hmm.
with Goji's indulgence, we might delve into some of those in future episodes because they're
Hmm.
just fun. So
Yep,
we'll see what's coming down the pipe.
especially those cave
I
girl
have
movies.
oh my yes, fur bikinis, loving it.
Mhm.
This was fun. I really enjoyed reviewing some of these films and just looking for what was available as far as merchandise and action figures.
Hmm.
They're a very different take compared to the more traditional Universal versions of the monsters, but
Right.
they're fun. I liked it,
Yeah.
so I can definitely see why you enjoy. these as much as you do the
Yeah.
Universal
As,
stuff.
as a big fan of classic horror, I think Hammer is about the cutoff point for me as far as the gore and things like that. Because I've said before, I don't like modern horror with the
Sure.
the torture porn and the body horror, things like that. So I think Hammer is the last of the classic horror films that I enjoy.
Yeah,
Before
and they
horror turned into slasher films and things like that.
exactly. Yeah, this was kind of an in between phase. It wasn't the you know stilted Hollywood black and white version of Universal. It wasn't the splatterfest of modern day horror. It was somewhere in the middle.
Hmm.
And at least until the early 70s, it was pretty good. After that, its mileage will vary depending
Yeah,
on how much you like camp and
yeah,
boobies.
yeah. They started losing money and they started chasing trends, and it just didn't work out
Yeah,
for them.
but still fun to explore. And
Mhm.
I'm glad you were available to do this with me because
Absolutely.
it's more fun to delve into horror with a friend. You
Hmm.
don't want to see these alone.
That's
They've
right.
told you.
Don't see it alone. Always
That's
bring a
right.
friend.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our delving into these, and let me know what you think in the comments. If you're interested in seeing more uh, horror and or specific Hammer films, or any other genre that you want us to look at, we'll certainly see what is available and what fits with the Beasties and Baddies. And
We're up for anything
so
here at Lagos Lair.
that's true. Sometimes that's a good thing. I don't know about all the time, but uh, yeah. And then there's Eduardo to deal with.
Hmm.
He's definitely in the baddie category,
He's a
and
horror in
Beastie.
and of
He's kind of
himself.
both. Yes, he is. He's been well behaved today, but he's probably napping. Well, I will see you in the very near future.
Hmm.
I think you and I are going to be hanging out in the lounge sometime. Uh,
Yep.
and next up for Beasties and Baddies will be, I believe. Well, you know what? We'll just leave that to be announced because I have a few things that are brewing. So I'm not sure which one's going to come next, but
Hmm.
it'll be fun.
Yep.
Stay tuned,
No matter what it is,
and
it'll be good.
one would hope. So with that, everybody have a good one.
Take care.